there's 4 things that changed my life in terms of my career in selling, and I'm hoping that these will have the same impact on you. So in today's video, I'm going to unpack all 4 of these in great detail. At the end of the video, I'm actually going to give you some concrete examples that I think will really provide a lot of value and insight into how you can become a better salesperson. Number 1 is the idea of understanding what is selling. And the thought of that is this, that no matter what we sell, the product, the service, what we are in fact selling is change. And we have to first understand that, because for me, when I was early in my career, I always really focused on the product, the service. I'm selling this thing. But really what's happening is that in order for somebody to consume the product or consume the service, behavioral change is the thing that must occur for a sale to be made. And the idea of traditional sales is that the harder we push, the challenge with that is that when we try to convince somebody to make a change, to buy our product, to buy our service, what often happens is the harder they push back. And so if you step back from trying to influence or persuade somebody to change or to make a decision, but rather make it safe for them to discover for themselves and how change may be necessary, the likelihood for them to change increases. So if you buy into this idea that all selling is a process of helping people discover whether a change is necessary or not, then we, of course, have to start looking into human behavior. And we have to start to look at the science behind why people change or why people decide not to change, which then brings us into this second idea of what social psychologists call perceived bias. And the perception of salespeople from the vast majority of the world is that salespeople cannot be trusted, that we must have our guard up, that we must be on the defensive, that we must be ready to protect ourselves at all cost, protect the ones that we love, because we don't know what this person is up to. Now, understanding the reason behind that is critically, and social psychologists have figured out that it's because of perceived bias. In our world of selling, the reason people are on the defensive and the reason they don't trust us, of course, is because their perception is that everything we do and everything we say, we have a bias towards making a sale, regardless if that decision to change is of any great benefit to the prospect or not. That their perception of us is that we are going to do, say, anything that we can, getting that person or convincing that person to do something resulting in us making money. We have a vested interest. And so that perceived bias is something that's constant, and that we're only saying what we're saying. We're only asking questions. We're only making recommendations that benefit us. And so understanding perceived bias and why prospects feel the way that they feel, it's really critical that how most people have been taught to sell is furthering that bias, which brings us into the third idea of today's video, which is psychological reactance. Psychological reactance is a cognitive bias that was originally studied in 1966 that describes the extreme reactions human beings experience when we feel as though we are being pushed towards doing something, or as though our freedom to make our own choices are being threatened. So in other words, this is exactly what most untrained salespeople do. This is what most sales trainings, are still training. Hey, say this to respond and overcome their objection. Say this to close the sale. Here are some examples. If you want to get your home sold, you need to price it at $400,000. Let's meet to talk about getting your home sold. You should accept this offer. Be sure you like this video. Be sure to subscribe. All of this type of communication elicits psychological reactance because nobody wants to be told what to do. And the more you try to tell somebody, hey, here's what you need to do, doing that, do this, here's what I think you should do, here's what you shouldn't do, you really should start working out. Anytime we try to communicate like that and think about yourself, what ends up happening? Your mind automatically gets into resistance. It's called psychological reactance. You start to push back. Nobody wants to be told anything. You tell the child, don't touch the hot stove. And your belief in saying that is that you're helping keep the child safe. But because of psychological reactance, the kid can't help but want to touch the hot stove even more. So here's the good news. There are some ways to decrease that reactance that we really have to pay attention to if we're ever going to reach our greatest potential as a salesperson. So 2 behavioral scientists conducted a great study. Here's what they did. These psychologists dressed up as panhandlers. They sat on a busy street and they asked people for money. And so they calculated the percentage of positive responses in comparison to the total number of requests. The psychologists would approach people and ask for money in 2 different ways. One way was that the psychologist would ask for money dressed up as a panhandler and say, please donate whatever you can. And the other way they asked for money was by adding something to the end of their request. They said, please donate what you can, but of course, it's up to you. And the outcome was incredible. That the statement where the person felt as though they had their own ability to make their own choice, that choice was not being threatened, that they weren't being told what to do, that they had the freedom to make their own decision, caused donations to go up by over 400%. So what can we take from this? That as salespeople, what we have to start doing is we have to start communicating in a way where prospects feel that the decision-making process is something that they get to do alone, because people make choices, they make decisions to change for their own reasons, not for your reasons. So we have to get out of the business of trying to persuade, try to pressure, try to convince, try to influence that decision. Because sales is not something that we do to people. Sales is a process that we do for and with people. And so that brings us up to the 4th idea of today's video, which is what psychologists call motivational interview. So the question then becomes in this video or in this conversation today, how do we communicate in a way where there is no perceived bias? All I'm concerned with is making this sale, and I don't care about you as the prospect. And how don't we elicit that psychological reactance so they resist us, push us away, give us objections, and ultimately retract and we lose the sale? How do we do that? This process of motivational interviewing is really going to help. So instead of trying to convince someone to do something like we've talked about in this video from this top-down approach, like, I know what's best for you, here's my solution, my product, my service is what's best for you, that we do something different, that we become almost like a guide, that we show up in this person's life as a guide or as a trusted advisor, that we guide them along a path, not from the top down, but alongside of them to help the person or the prospect discover what is right for them, so that we are not perceived as though, well, of course you're asking me that because you're the beneficiary of that question, Mr. Salesperson. People don't change for their own reasons, not yours. So here are some examples of what not to do that elicits bias, reactance, and ultimately sales resistance. This is what I call the anti-change language. So if you want to continue to not make sales, not build relationships, not generate leads, not serve people, then this is how you would communicate. Salesperson, let's go ahead and meet. Does Monday or Tuesday work better? The old adage, trial close, or the old, choice close. The title of the close being taught is the exact opposite of how humans behave. So the forced choice close, forced choice being the key words here, should be exactly what you're looking not to do, but it's being taught every single day. So the prospect can't help but respond because you're forcing them to make a decision. And what we know, what I've already taught you in this video, is that when you try to force something on somebody, they push back because you're eliciting reactance. They feel as though their decision or their freedom to make their own decisions is being threatened. So you leave the prospect to only respond with, well, let me talk with my husband and I'll get back to you. And then you want to get mad at the prospect for giving you an objection, where it was you who were the one who elicited that type of response. Let me give you another example. Salesperson. I'm doing a survey of all the for sale by owners in the area, and I was wondering if the home sold, where are you planning to move next? To which the prospect responds with, that's none of your business. Why are you calling me? Well, let's look at that question. You call a prospect, ring, ring, ring. Prospect picks up the phone, hello, and you jump right into, I'm doing a survey of all the for sale by owners in the area, and I was wondering if the home sold, where would you move next? This is what's being taught. The prospect can't help but say, of course the person's in reactance. Who are you? Why are you calling me? Why are you? That's none of your business why I'm moving. You're just calling me out of the blue and you expect me to tell you all the reasons and my whole life story of why I'm going to move? I don't even know who you are. Why in the world would I tell you that? And oh, by the way, if I were to answer that question, which I will not, who is the beneficiary of the answer? You, Mr. Salesperson, or me, the prospect? What benefit, Mr. Salesperson calling me out of the blue, do I have answering your question about where I'm moving without knowing anything about this phone call? Only you can be the beneficiary. Therefore, that perceived bias is at its all-time height. You haven't given me any opportunity to decide whether or not I even want to have this conversation. So you've elicited reactance. And so therefore, I push back. Let's give you another one. Salesperson. This is Bob from Remax. We just listed a home over on Smith Street. It has 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and it's listed at $299,000. And I was wondering, who do you know looking to move in the area? To which the prospect responds, take me off your list. Again, for all of the reasons I just told you, this is what's being taught. Truly, this is a script that is being taught to real estate agents right now. This is the exact word for word script being taught. You call somebody and they answer the phone, hello, and you say, this is Bob from Remax. We just listed a home. Wait a minute. You haven't given the opportunity for the prospect to decide whether or not they even want to have this conversation. No, you bypassed that. You went right into it. You forced your way into the conversation. What do we know about forcing that? What do we know about taking away someone's ability to make their own choice? It elicits reactance. Then we go right into, who do you know looking to move into this area? Which, who is the beneficiary of that question? Oh, that's right. You, the salesperson, because you're looking to make a sale. You have commission breath. You're looking to get money. Let's give you a few more. Salesperson. When do you plan on interviewing the right agent for the job of selling your home? To which the prospect responds with, I'm not interested. Stop calling me. Again, it's what's being taught right now. When do you plan on interviewing the right agent for the job of selling your home? Why, Mr. Salesperson? So if I answer that question, let me guess. Because you want to list my house. You want me to pay you to list my house. Am I right? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. Yeah, no thanks. Salesperson. This is why I think you should list your home at $399,000 so you can get what you want in the time you want. Won't that be great? Prospect. I think your recommendation for my price is too low. No one cares what you think. Nobody wants to be told what to do. The more you keep trying to convince people, the more you keep trying to persuade people, this is what I think you should do. This is what, I would do. People change for their own reasons, not yours. Salesperson. Last example. Are you aware that most for sale by owners fail to sell on their own? Let's simply do the right thing. Sign the contract with a downward inflection. This is what is being trained. Sign the contract. Downward inflection. This is an embedded command, as so they say. You do what I tell you to do, Mr. Prospect. Yeah, right. We know humans, when we do that, prospects don't want to hear it. They resist, they retract, and you leave the prospect to respond with, well, listen, I understand, but listen, we're going to sell this thing without a realtor. We appreciate it. And they're gone forever. So let's look at these scenarios and show you some examples of how you might want to use reverse selling and human psychology that has been proven in over 2,000 human-controlled trials that is undebatable that we know work with humans. So let's first explore setting the appointment. I told you what not to do, so maybe we'll get into some examples of what you could do. Maybe you say something like this: Mr. Prospect, let's not agree to anything over the phone. I'm wondering if it would make sense for us to potentially meet. I'd be happy to share with you a brand new strategy that I'm using with my clients to get buyers to offer a great price on their home without the stress that most sellers feel. And then you can decide what happens next. And so that might be an example of how you could approach a situation to get somebody to increase the likelihood that somebody agrees to meet with you. By removing the pressure, what we're doing is we're giving the prospect the freedom to make their own decision. We have also positioned the meeting where there isn't a bias for us to close the sale. Why? Because we gave the prospect the right to make their own decision whether or not they might work with us by telling them, you can decide what happens next. Does that seem reasonable? Well, of course it seems reasonable, because you're giving me all the perceived control, which is what we have to do in order to be an effective communicator. Let's look at another scenario of opening a sales call. Rather than forcing our way into a call, like I outlined earlier in this video, you might say something like this: ring, ring, ring. Someone answers the phone. Bob, this is Brandon. I'm a realtor. Listen, before you hang up, I was hoping to ask you a quick question. Would that be okay? Now, we give the prospect freedom to have this conversation or to not have this conversation. Either way is fine. What you're going to find is what you will find is that more people, because you open up a conversation like this, they say, sure, what's up? Because they're not used to people communicating this way, where you've given up all the perceived control to the prospect. And when the prospect says, sure, what's up? Now the principle of consistency kicks in, and the likelihood for them to have a longer conversation with you increases. Let's talk about setting a list price for realtors. That's who I work with most. So let's talk about that. So here's a better way to help you get the seller to arrive on making a decision that is best for them without them feeling as though you're trying to tell them what to do. You might say something like this: Mrs. Seller, what would be the risk if you decided to list your home at a price that caused it to sit on the market for a long time? Now, you have two options as a real estate agent. You can tell the seller, Mr. Seller, I think you should list the house at this price for this reason, this reason, this reason. And as you know, most sellers will say, yeah, well, dude, I want to list it for more. What would be a lot more effective and what is more likely is, again, prospects don't believe what you say. They believe what they tell themselves. So when we ask a question like this, that is a Socratic style question, it's Socratic in its nature, you only leave the prospect to say to themselves what the outcome could be of potentially overpricing their property without you saying a word. And that is the only way we know that humans, to increase the likelihood that humans will in fact embrace change. Now, let's talk about closing the sale. You might say something like this. And again, this is Socratic in nature. We might say, Mr. Prospect, certainly, I'm not the agent for everyone, lowering the bias. But if we decide to work together, what are some things that we discussed today that you would find value in? Ooh, now we get the prospect to start doing all the selling. Isn't that what we want to do? Don't we want the prospect to verbalize themselves what is right and what is wrong for them? We help them to discover and to make decisions for themselves. People make decisions for their own reasons, not yours. So if you're still with me right now and you're still watching this video, if you want to see all of this in action, I recently interviewed one of my top coaching clients who's mastered this and is now listing 15 to 20 homes a month using this reverse selling style. Now, if you want to see him in action, feel free to watch this video right here. But of course, it's up to you.